Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, we would like to thank you for being given the opportunity to deliver this presentation under the guidance of our lecturer, Mr. Wahyu Arif Raharjo. Today, we will deliver a presentation in this Introduction to Diplomacy course with the theme Economic Diplomacy.
What is economic diplomacy? According to Stephen Woolcock and Nicholas Payne, economic diplomacy is decision-making and negotiation in core issues affecting international economic relations. This means international financial arrangements and coordination, negotiation of trade and investment, development and international environmental policies. Economic diplomacy is concerned with the process of decision-making and negotiation on policy or questions relating to international economic relations. And then, according to Peter van Bergijk and Selwyn Moons, economic diplomacy is a set of activities, both recording methods and process for international decision-making related to cross-border economic activities such as export, import, investment, lending, aid, migration, pursued by state and non-state actors in the real world. In conclusion, both have a similar definition, so it can be concluded that economic diplomacy is related to the management of foreign relations in the economic field, which includes but is not limited to export and import activities, foreign loans and assistance, international trade and investment.
Okay, next slide is domestic decision making. There are two characteristics of economic diplomacy. First, the Minister of Foreign Affairs usually doesn't take the lead in driving the decision-making process because usually in making decision, various ministers are responsible for the related subject. Usually, the Minister of the Trade, Finance, or the Environment participate in making decision because they are the main department responsible for producing a joint position to lead delegation in international negotiation. So when does the foreign minister take the lead in making decision? In international economic affairs, the foreign minister usually take the lead in coordinating the policies and negotiation covering a wide range of economic issues. And usually, foreign ministers tend to actively lead economic diplomacy in developing countries. And the second characteristic of economic diplomacy is greater involvement of private sector agencies, as government can directly benefit from successful strategies. In this regard, government officials often consult with business interests to decide policy or strategic negotiation in which each department has its own individual context, such as a banking association with the Ministry of Finance, the agricultural lobby with the Ministry of Agricultural, and others.
Is international negotiation. The most ambitious aspect of economic diplomacy is the negotiation of multilateral agreements that bind the participating government. International trade, of which the Uruguay Round Agreement, which entered into force in 1995, was most prominently seen, bringing all forms of trade in industrial, agricultural, and service good under multilateral rules and launching the World Trade Organization with almost worldwide membership. World Trade Organization commitment can be enforced through a dispute resolution mechanism that imposes sanction on members who violate it. In the 1990s, a similar process was launched in the global environment during the conclusion of a multilateral agreement on the ozone layer, climate change, and biodiversity. In the financial sector, the IMF is the dominant multilateral institution, but rarely engaged in binding negotiations. Exchange rate regimes have been very fluid. since a floating exchange rate became prevalent in the 1970s. There are few on-member assets and contributing to utilize large amounts of IMF resources must meet requirements set by IMF staff. Since the crisis caused by a collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008, stricter discipline has been put into place to ensure financial stability, but this is applied nationally rather than collectively. While multilateral regimes are the most ambitious, economic diplomacy is also carried out through other levels. This multilateral economic diplomacy will include formal agreement at the bilateral and regional level and voluntary cooperation as in OECD, where efforts have no legal force but are underpinned by mutual interest and peer pressure.
The illustration of economic diplomacy at work, I would like to invite you to analyze the Chinese strategy in economic diplomacy. We would like to tell you about BRI or Belt and Road Initiative, and BRI is a global infrastructure development strategy adopted by the Chinese government in 2013 to invest in 70 countries and international organizations. Economic diplomacy can involve instruments of trade, investment, finance, and currency over various economic realms, of which issues such as energy and environmental are the most linked to China's financial security and development. Intel modes of aid, cooperation, or sanctions occur at the global, regional, and bilateral levels. Under the BRI framework, China seeks to promote infrastructure development, technical industrial cooperation, and finance integration, while foreign aid can also be considered as a part of economic statecraft. Let's compare between Western and Chinese economic diplomacy. I think we all can agree that the concept of economic diplomacy is relatively underdeveloped in Western scholarly work, which, in their view, tends to relegate the role of economics to merely one of many means to pursue national security and political interests. Others attribute it to the fact that economic interests are an inherent component of U.S. and Western foreign policy given its commercial and capitalist nature, thus reducing the need for a specific conceptualization of distinct economic diplomacy. Of course, there is a considerable English language literature on economic statecraft and particularly sanctions, but less so on the mechanism of positive inducement, which are often emphasized in China as a unique aspect of China's economic diplomacy. In particular, the BRI, currently China's main thrust in economic diplomacy, is meant to reorient regional discourse from security to economics, maintain an open, inclusive regional order that prevents the emergence of a U.S.-led alliance system from containing China's development. Here are the list of 5 strategic objectives that we've analyzed. The first is to stabilize relations with neighboring countries. Next is to respond to the U.S. rebellions to Asia. Then to promote linkage on the Eurasian continent. Next, to enhance cooperation with major of rising powers such as Russia, India, and Indonesia. And to defend and develop Chinese strategic interests on both land and water. So, economic benefits aside, spearheading regional financial agreements such as ASEAN-led Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is framed to enhance China's leadership and counters the U.S. attempts to exclude China. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank or AIIB, and the Silk Road Fund are cited as the example of China's innovation in economic diplomacy, mainly to provide additional financing resources and promote regional economic integration. While the AIIB is a multilateral institution providing development financing, the Silk Road Fund is targeted for BRI projects and funded by China's foreign exchange reserves. How the two operate in tandem and comparing the types of projects and destinations they invest, it will be interesting to observe in the future.
In what situation is this type of diplomacy called be the best practice? Rapid economic developments over the recent decades has made China the center of many research. Science from 1978, when the cultural reforms began, to 2009. One important note that needs to be underlined is that the methods used by China are not entirely dependent on military power, but soft power. In the analysis of economic diplomacy in a country, the real representation of value is the attitude and behavior of the people from the place where these values originate and develop what the local people believe and run by them. Then that is what is called values, so that in the context of economic diplomacy analysis, it can be concluded that the values of a society, or also called values social, is important. And because values develop somewhere, values for each region and region on earth cannot be generalized. This is what makes a country unique and distinctive. Characteristic of China's behavior. Characteristic of China that come from Confucius. So, Guanzi, or network of relationship. Don't always remember that the help you have given others, but so don't forget to return the favor you have received from others.
Yeah, now we've come to talk about in what situation in this type of diplomacy could be the best practice. So starting with the rapid economic development over the recent decades has made China the center of many research. China has been known for having a unique technique of diplomacy. So a group of people interact with each other is strongly influenced by the values that have been developed in the social order. So now we're going to talk about China's development on economic diplomacy. Now, researchers even predict that China will become the largest in the next few decades. China's commercial diplomacy in Asia noted that at the end of the 1990s, the total foreign direct investment entering China was the third largest of the total FDI in all developing countries. Okay, so yeah, we've come to the end of the presentation, but I'm not just here to close the presentation verbally. I'm actually here to give you just a little knowledge, just a little insight about this economic diplomacy. You all already heard about you know about what economic diplomacy is and how do countries conduct this type of diplomacy, or what is the best situation to have this kind of diplomacy, blah, blah, blah. But I'm just here to give you an example. What people does not talked about too much is how this kind of diplomacy affects our world. And by affecting our world, it means as in like the bad effect that happened. Let me give you an example, just a little example. What happened in the Egypt recently? That this ship Ever Given that was stuck there. It was a hard few days, like costing like $400 million each day. Until it get not stuck anymore. But what I'm actually seeing in this in this situation, in this event, is not just one ship that got stuck in the tiny strip of water. I see an ill-protected system, And why do I say that? I always wanted to say this to you guys, We live in a strange world for how peaceful it is. And why is that? It's just because these superpowers that controls our economic diplomacy behind the scenes, that actually controls what we had now. Our peace, our economic system, our way to protect, like the Suez Canal, for example. Let me just give you like a little example, economic diplomacy example. The U.S. supported Egypt, like granting them like $1.4 billion each year to protect that canal. That's actually an economic diplomacy. But I'm not gonna say, maybe it's a little part. There's a little part of military diplomacy, but I ain't gonna say that. That's an economic diplomacy. I can see that clearly. And by that, we all know that the U.S. does not want to repeat the dark history behind this canal. In the 1950s, all countries tried to rob this canal from the Egypt. There's England, there's France, there's Israel, and a lot of countries try to take this canal from the Egypt. And the U.S. actually create this type of diplomacy, granting our peace to protect this canal. And we can't take it for granted now, because by this example, I just want you guys to know that, and to see what actually happened behind the superpowers controlling this type of diplomacy. That's what actually I'm here for, and I hope you find it useful. Thank you, everyone. That's the end of our presentation. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.